By now, some of the glow has worn off a little, but for those who were there, a memory exists that will last for years to come. This is a picture of it. Yeah. The Royals Welcome Home Parade. As I watched that sea of people, I couldn't help but wonder if they had won 5 of the last 10 World Series, would there have been this kind of reception? I doubt it. Certainly there would be a celebration if they had won every year, but it's hard for me to imagine 800,000 people would come to Kansas City. It was the waiting that made it as big of a celebration as much as the victory. As the church looks toward Christmas, we have a season of waiting that's built into the calendar. We call that season Advent. Now, historically, that season was looking toward the day when Jesus comes, both from a historical aspect, looking toward the birth of Jesus, and a present context as we look toward the fulfillment of time and the last day when Jesus will return. Traditionally, we have set aside 4 Sundays to prepare. Last year, and again this year, we are experimenting with the idea of setting aside 7 Sundays to prepare for Christmas. That makes today the first Sunday of Advent. It's a season of waiting. And while we wait, we sing carols, and we decorate, and we have parties, and we buy gifts. We talked about some of the Christmas store this week and the Jingle Bell ride next Sunday afternoon. If done well, our waiting will culminate in a celebration not unlike what took place in Kansas City this week. In the next few weeks, we will explore some ideas about how to wait and what to do while we are waiting. So let me begin with a story. It's the story of a brilliant young pastor who lived in the 19th century. His name was John Mason Neal. Church leaders of his day were afraid of what he might do. In many ways, they were threatened by him. He was so sharp, so smart. He was evangelical and he was progressive. But his ideas showed that he was too much of a free thinker for them in the structures of the church. So they sent him to a little-known parish in the Madeira Islands. Now, if you've never heard of the Madeira Islands, you're not alone. It's a small group of islands between the Azores and Africa. For much of history, they were under Portuguese rule. They are now an independent country. When they sent him there, the church leaders hoped they would never hear from him again. But Neal was not about to give up on his calling. While he was waiting for them to remember him, he established an orphanage. He started a school for girls. He built a house of refuge for prostitutes. He found ways to serve the poor and the needy in the community he served, and he also began an organization that continues to meet the needs of the poor around the world. At the same time, he found ways to feed his intellectual thirst. He was fluent in 20 languages, so it didn't matter what ship pulled into harbor. He was trying to find what books they had that he could read, and he read everything he could lay his hands on. He filled his time of waiting by serving and by learning. And in doing so, he found meaning and purpose, even in the most faraway place the church could think of to send him. Now, I have no doubt he wanted change, but he continued to keep his vision on what God had in mind, rather than limiting his view to what church leaders thought might be possible. Too often, some of us are just wishing for change without looking for what that change might be. We don't like what is, and so we work to change things, but without a vision of what the future will look like, we often find that things only get worse. You can make a case that we as Americans follow that pattern in presidential elections. We're dissatisfied with what is currently happening, so we vote for change without clearly thinking about what is going to replace the current administration. A similar thing is happening all across Europe as refugees stream out of countries and the uncertainties of the conflicts of the Middle East. Many of them don't know where they're going. They just know it can't be as bad as what they left behind. So they wander while they wait. It's the story of immigrants to our country as well. Some come to our shores because of what we have to offer. Many more, however, are more interested in leaving something bad than they are looking for something good. The prophet Micah speaks in a time of turmoil. There is an uncertain future on the horizon. The fall of the northern kingdom of Israel at the hands of the Assyrians is imminent. The foreign powers of the day are looking to Jerusalem as their next conquest. Into that setting, Micah paints a picture of a world that will look to Jerusalem as a source of wisdom. He tells them the day is coming when there will be no more fear and no death and no war. When the people are eventually led into exile, his words provide a glimmer of hope, something toward which they can look while they wait. By the time of Jesus, there is a growing longing for those words to be filled, not unlike the longing of Royals fans leading up to this year. Now, we don't often think about it, but it was the exile that created the culture that allowed the synagogue to be formed. It was in that context that the scriptures began to take shape and form. It was in a time of crisis and waiting that the people of Israel reflected on what God was doing. It became a fruitful time of learning as well as serving. Pastor Neil in the Madeira Islands had a similar story. One of the books he came across was an old Latin prayer book. He translated it into English, and he found one of the songs that was written by a long-forgotten monk. The hymn spoke about several images of the coming king that were found in the Old Testament. Neil put those words to music he had learned from some French nuns who were singing in Portugal. And so in this isolated part of the world, God was at work, and a song was born. It's probably the oldest song we still sing in worship. Originally, it was intended to be sung one stanza a day for the 7 days leading up to Christmas, with a prayer that was to be prayed throughout the day. The song and the words capture a sense of waiting that continues to speak to our hearts, a longing for the fulfillment of the promises that are made. It helps us learn who God is while we're waiting. But the tune is one of yearning. It reminds me of the story of Lee Ak-yoon. She's an 88-year-old woman who lives in the house her husband built for her decades ago. But she and her husband found themselves in different cities when the truce in Korea happened, and she lives in the south and he lives in the north. They don't see each other. She lives in the house that he built while she waits for him. She waits. And while she waits, she hopes. She hopes for what might be. At one of the reunions between the North and the South in the past few decades, she was able to see him again. For 2 days, they were able to talk and hold hands and hug. But then they each returned to their places on either side of the border. Jesus came and spent 30 short years with us. He taught us how to live and how to love and how to serve. And now he is waiting for the day of our reunion. As people of faith, we also wait. And we wait with hope. We wait for what is yet to come. Micah paints a picture of what that might look like. But it isn't the only vision of what might be. Throughout the Scriptures, there are images of what might be, promises of God that are yet to be fulfilled. Things like Emmanuel, God with us, our King and our lawgiver, the expected of the nations. The wisdom of God who came forth from the mouth of the Most High, reaching from one end of the earth to the other. Adonai, the Lord, who is the leader of the house of Israel. The one who appeared to Moses in the flames of the bush. The root of Jesse, before whom kings keep silence. The key of David, who opens a door and no one can shut it. The dayspring, the brightness of the light eternal. The King of the Gentiles, the desired one, our cornerstone that unites us together. All of these images lead us to sing with a song of longing.